Hi, and welcome to Hamilton, the podcast. I'm Vinton Bayne.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
Robbie, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to actually take a break from everything.
Take a break? Well, we just started. We can't take a break now.
We can't take a break now. Okay,
I'm going to say no to this.
Oh, no. They're going to think that was planned.
It wasn't. So starting with Take a Break. In this song, we're going to see Hamilton hard at work and Eliza begging him to come downstairs, be with his child. It's his birthday. He's got something to show you here. And then we're going to see Eliza and Angelica try to convince him to go on vacation for a while. Take a break. Let's get out of here. But Hamilton has too much to do.
Right. Remember, this is coming out of the really intense cabinet battle and the confrontation from George Washington, where he's telling him that if you don't get congressional approval, they're probably going to take your job away. They're probably going to call for your removal as the Treasury Secretary, and you're not going to be able to provide for your family in that way, at least. And you're definitely not going to have the prowess and the power of being in charge of this portion of the executive branch of the government.
So the song starts off with them counting to 9. Here in French first, before English. And counting to 9 is kind of a theme in this musical, usually referring to a duel somehow. And it's kind of a foreshadowing here, knowing where Philip ends up.
Right. It's absolutely a callback and a foreshadowing of the 10 dual commandments when you count up to 9. It's also just important to know that this is his 9th birthday, and they're counting up to 9 years, like counting up to 9 in French. And so later he'll talk about how he practices French and plays piano with his mother. And that's what this moment is. This mother and son are spending time together at home, going through their studies together. They're working on what they need to work on. And yeah, they're learning French and they're playing their scales and their arpeggios on the piano. You see this really emotional, intimate moment between a mother and a son. And they're just at home learning for a little bit and spending time together. And Hamilton is at work.
So this counting is actually a piano lesson and a French lesson, as Robbie just said. And while they're singing here, Philip is actually singing in harmony instead of echoing his mother's directions. But that's going to come up later in Stay Alive, the reprise.
Yeah, and I feel like I should apologize to the listeners for just about 30 seconds of sadness, because we do want to talk about that for just a moment, because later on, when everything is terrible, at one of the saddest moments of this entire musical, Philip is on his hospital bed, Eliza is holding him, and they're trying to be transported back to this happy moment when they are trying to remember the good times at the end of Philip's life. And so they're remembering back, and she sings to him, "You change the melody every time. I would always change the line." And he kind of tries to laugh, and it's really heartbreaking and gut-wrenching, but it's remembering that these were the good days. Everything after this song goes downhill in the musical. I can't think of, maybe correct me if I'm missing something, but I can't think right now of a single truly happy moment from this point to the end of the musical.
Yeah, the stakes are raised, things start falling apart left and right. And yeah, just a lot of heartbreak coming up. I honestly don't know if I'm going to be able to do that episode. We might have to find a guest host.
It's
I'm
going
to be like crying in the corner while you guys record it.
So hard. But I say all that because that helps to emphasize that this is a truly happy, innocent moment where you see 9-year-old Philip Hamilton looking up to his father, looking up to his mother, singing, learning, growing, wanting to be like his dad, wanting to impress his parents. And in this song, you see that joy, you see that happiness. And this is the moment that they try to recapture when they try to transport Hamilton on his deathbed, Philip Hamilton, to this happy moment. And this is what they recall together.
Right. So we jump straight to Hamilton in his office working, and what he's actually doing in this moment in the musical is writing a letter to Angelica.
Yeah, and that's a really helpful historical account, because a lot of their correspondence that we actually have historically is their letters. We don't necessarily have video documentation of the Founding Fathers giving their speeches, but we get to see their letters that they write. We get to read their correspondence and their notes to one another and their journals. And so here, this is actually going to make some references to the different things that we see in the Hamilton Angelica Church correspondence that historians have poured over every single bit of punctuation, even in their letters. And you'll see that this is just kind of a beckoning back to the way that we understand history is by reading those primary documents and trying to deduce what is going on behind the scenes in that. So he's sitting down, writing a letter to Angelica Church across the seas, his older sister-in-law.
And he says, "My dearest," and then there's a little comma, "Angelica." And that comma's going to be important later in the song. We'll get to it. Not right now, though. We're going to skip ahead. So then he goes on to say, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow," which is a quote from Macbeth.
Yeah, and it keeps going, creeps in this petty pace from day to day, finishes that line out. Macbeth is going to kind of be a huge parallel from this whole stanza to Hamilton's life in general. And you'll see this unpacked in just a moment, a little bit more in depth. But I liked this little comment in the Hamiltone where Lin-Manuel Miranda was talking about how the first line he actually pulled from Macbeth in the rough draft of this particular song was this really obscure little line from Act 5 where Macbeth says, "They have tied me to a stake, I cannot fly, but bear-like I must fight the course." And Lin-Manuel Miranda says that's his favorite line from that particular reference.
Right.
Like he would have preferred to keep that in there, except that his good friend Oscar Eustis said, "Lynn, I run the Shakespeare Festival, and even I didn't catch that reference."
Right.
It's so obscure and random. And so he said, okay, I'll pick something a little more popular, a little bit more well-known to where Hamilton can actually be recognizably quoting Macbeth.
Yeah. And I guess I'm not that familiar with Macbeth, but apparently this is one of the most famous phrases from it, to where you even have videos you can look up on YouTube of Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen taking quite a bit of time just explaining it and breaking it down as an actor. How do you perform this certain line here?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of that. Sir Ian McKellen actually was a star in a production of Macbeth that you can see online pretty easily,
right,
where he actually played the title role and did a brilliant job. He looks a little younger, and so he's not Magneto performing these lines, which kind of surprised me when I went back to watch this recently. It's so good. If you're a Shakespeare fan, if you're not, it's worth at least pulling up some of that and going into it. If you are a Shakespeare fan and you're a Broadway fan in general, and you're listening to this podcast, I highly recommend, as a side note, go listen to the musical Something Rotten, because it's all about Shakespeare as this superstar, Elvis of his day, where people are like going to Elvis concerts, going to Shakespeare concerts, singing things like "Do Sonnet 13, do Sonnet 13." He's this, and it's a story of this rival playwright named Nicholas Bottom who says, "Shakespeare, you will not make an ass out of me," and then he uses Nick Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream and actually turns it into a donkey in that particular play. But the whole thing is this comedy talking about how musicals work. It's very meta. If you like Shakespeare, if you like musicals, that's a really good one to see. I got to see it on Broadway last December. It is fantastic. It's beautiful. But now we're talking about Macbeth. We're talking about Hamilton. And he goes on and he kind of references this a little bit more directly. He says, "I trust you'll understand the reference to another Scottish tragedy without my having to name the play." Which made me really excited at first when I got to that line, because I thought, oh, I know what he's talking about. It's Macbeth. I figured it out. I felt really clever for exactly half a second, because then he goes on and he actually names the title character himself. I'm like, oh, man, now everybody got it. And I'm not as hipster and cool. I got it before they said the line.
Right, because the superstition is that you're not supposed to name the play Macbeth, but you can actually name the character Macbeth.
Yeah, I remember when I was actually a theater noob, and I was my freshman year of high school. I was doing the musical Godspell for my very first musical, and it was something that they kind of were initiating the freshmen into this particular show, and they told us all the legend and they built up this huge mythos about how, as a theater kid, you cannot say the Shakespeare play, and they kept alluding to it. And so as a total noob for all this stuff, I think one of us actually said the play name accidentally, and they're like, "No, you're gonna doom everything. This is terrible." So they made up this fake. I don't know. I've never researched to see whether they were just making things up or whether this is some weird tradition, but there was some type of ritual, spin around 3 times, touch the posts of the different curtains and all these things on the stage. You can cure the curse and get rid of the particular thing that's going to tear down your show. But it was really fun and silly. But that's the whole superstition, that you're not supposed to say Macbeth, or else your show is going to go downhill. Interestingly enough, everything does go downhill as soon as he says the name
That's
Macbeth.
true. Yeah, I had not thought of that. I was going to mention when you were talking about your experience with this, there's an old episode of the show Blackadder that has Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean in it.
Oh, yeah.
He was the star of that show. They made fun of that a lot. They had these two people in the play there, and they're like, you can't mention the play. And he just keeps going, what play? Macbeth. And then they do this thing when he says it, they'll spin around 3 times and say this like gibberish word and it's like slap each other's noses. And every time he says it, they have to do it. And he's like, do you have to do that every time I say Macbeth?
That's exactly the thing. I couldn't remember all the things, but that was very much a part of that process. I'm glad that there's someone else in the world was as ridiculous as we were when I was in high school. That's great. So if you don't know very much about the story of Macbeth, this is not at all a love story or a pretty story or a happy story at all. It's very bloody. Lots of people die. There's a lot of bad people in it. Macbeth himself is kind of a villainous character, much in the style of House of Cards. Like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are kind of the Claire and Frank Underwood of Shakespeare's day in the time period. And so he goes on and he basically names a couple different parallels for those certain characters. And he says, they think me Macbeth. Ambition is my folly.
Yeah, and ambition was Macbeth's folly. He wanted to be king, and he was going to do anything to get to that position.
Exactly. So at the beginning of the Shakespeare play, Macbeth is just a general in this army, basically. He and Banquo are off at war, fighting together for the king, and they are headed back home. They pass 3 witches who serve Hecate, the goddess of magic, and they kind of prophesy over Macbeth, saying that you are going to become the Thane of this certain region, and then you're going to become the king eventually, and they kind of shove it off like, oh, that's just silly little superstitions. And later on, as soon as they leave the witches, someone comes up and says, hey, by the way, Macbeth, you're getting a promotion because this guy who is the Thane is now actually a traitor to the cause and the king is going to kill him. So congratulations, you got a promotion. And so Macbeth starts thinking, well, if that portion of the prophecy came true, maybe I am going to be the king. Maybe I am going to actually come in and rise up above my station after the war. So it's a very Hamilton parallel already. But in Macbeth's storyline, he decides, ultimately through the influence of his wife, Lady Macbeth, to to exactly kill the king and take his place.
Right.
So that's the parallel that Hamilton's enemies are lobbying against him. He's saying, they think me Macbeth, like ambition is my folly. Like I'm trying to rise up with no regard for ethics, no regard for what is right and wrong. I'm just trying to do all of these things. I'm a pain in the butt, a massive pain. And he says, I'm a polymath. So what's that word?
That basically just means that you know a lot about a lot of things. You have a wide variety of things that you're knowledgeable in.
Yeah, exactly. So he definitely, and just historically, he was kind of a polymath. He knew a lot about finance. He knew a lot about politics. He knew a lot about war strategy. He knew a lot about medicine for at least that period of time. He researched a lot of things and studied a lot of things. He always kind of carried a book with him wherever he went. And so that's kind of where he was. And then he goes in and gives some complete parallels. And he says, Madison is that Banquo guy. The guy who was my friend at the beginning of the musical, who helped me out and who was fighting beside me to help pass the Constitution. But then in the Macbeth play, Banquo is the guy who suspects from the very beginning that the king was probably murdered by Macbeth. So Banquo goes in and he starts the investigation and he starts looking under all of the rocks, trying to uncover the secrets about what truly happened to the king. And Banquo, because he's getting too close to the truth, Macbeth has him killed. And then the ghost of Banquo haunts Macbeth throughout the rest of the musical, and he can't live with himself because of all of the pain and the torture that he knows he's done something wrong now. If it wasn't bad enough that he had killed the king and took his place, he's now also being haunted by the guy that was his original friend, who's now his enemy, who is trying to basically haunting him, saying, you're doing something wrong. You're doing something wrong. So he says the parallel for our musical is Madison.
And Jefferson is Macduff, who shows up late in the play to oppose Macbeth, just like Jefferson shows up late in our musical here to oppose Hamilton.
Yeah, so it's another exact parallel where in the actual Shakespeare play, Macduff comes on stage. He's not at the beginning of the play, but he comes in later, and from the moment he steps on stage, he is opposed to our hero Macbeth, or anti-hero or whatever you want to call him, tragic guy, the protagonist, Macbeth. And so Macduff in the play, from Shakespeare's point of view, actually goes back to get the rightful heir of the king, the rightful heir who had run away when Macbeth took the throne. He came back and he says, hey, why don't you come in and actually, like, we'll usurp the throne, we'll lead a force to take back the kingdom, and we will get Macbeth back for all the wrong that he has done, and you will be established on the king's throne, and all will be right again in the world. So Macduff and Macbeth are classic antagonist, protagonist to one another, going against each other in this moment. And Hamilton sees that his antagonist here is Jefferson, who came on the stage late, but actively, with every single move he made, he was trying to counter Hamilton's acts.
And then Birnam Wood is Congress on its way to Dunsinane, which in Macbeth, the three witches foretold to Macbeth that he would be safe until the Birnam Wood was on its way to Dunsinane, which to him was like, well, that's never going to happen. It's a forest over there. It's not going to move.
Yeah, forests don't usually up and march to a castle.
Right, but they did.
Yeah, so here's the way that some of that played out. The prophecies are notoriously vague, so that writers can make them really useful to move their plot along. But the way that Shakespeare's prophecies were given at this point in time, the three witches said a couple things like, no one naturally born of woman can ever actually defeat you, Macbeth. And so he thinks, oh yeah, great, I'm all that. No one naturally born of a woman can ever defeat me because he's pretty much invincible. Then he says that you won't be defeated until the Birnam Wood marches on Dunsinane, your castle, the hill where your actual fort is. And so he's like, okay, well, the forest has to actually uproot itself and move towards me. And then someone that's somehow miraculously not born of woman would have to come along to actually defeat me. And so what happens there is with the someone born of woman thing, Macbeth basically looks out and he finds out that his enemy is not naturally born of woman. He was untimely cut from his mother's womb. And so we'd call it a C-section today.
Right.
So it was like, since he was ripped from the womb, he wasn't naturally born through the woman. And so he's like, oh, so maybe the gods in Shakespeare's play are playing this semantic game, but I think we can let him get away with that because Shakespeare is basically the semantic god. So that's all right. He's doing what he's supposed to do here. And then as far as this forest analogy, he says that the troops were coming to attack Macbeth, and they lined up inside of the forest, and they actually uprooted some of the trees, grabbed the branches, picked up the wood themselves, and kind of used it as camouflage to move their troops forward, kind of shielding themselves with the trees and the branches from the actual forest, moving it towards the castle to get closer and closer without being able to be taken out very easily because, hey, they're being led by trees almost. Right. So Macbeth looks out and he sees, oh my goodness, the thing I didn't think could ever challenge me is actually marching towards me. And so Hamilton here is saying, this is Congress. I didn't think Congress was ever going to be that big of a deal. I thought I could do my thing. Congress could do their thing. They wouldn't be able to actually be powerful enough to stop me. I thought that I could kind of maneuver around what needed to be done. But here he knows that if he doesn't get congressional approval, they can actually take his job away. So here, the thing that he thought he had nothing to fear from is actually coming along and is taking a step towards threatening Hamilton's position.
So Shakespeare aside, Hamilton continues his letter here, and he says to Angelica, and there you are an ocean away. Do you have to live an ocean away? Thoughts of you subside, then I get another letter. I cannot put the notion away. And this was actually true to their relationship in the letters that they wrote each other. One such letter said from Hamilton to Angelica, how deeply you have rooted yourself in the affections of your friends on this side of the Atlantic. Some of us are and must continue inconsolable for your absence.
Yeah, so he was absolutely longing for Angelica even before he says the line later in this particular song, or at the beginning of the next song. But I like just the way that staging happens in this particular musical, where the last lines of Hamilton's letter are sung by both Hamilton and Angelica together.
Right.
Where they come in and they're both longing for each other across the sea. They're both wanting that companionship of being right next to each other and actually being, they're complaining about how hard it is to correspond with someone you love so much who is so far away. It's not like email or text messages where you just send this and it's immediately there. This takes a while to get all the way across the ocean and then get your correspondence all the way back across the ocean. It's not easy to do a long distance friendship or a long distance relationship when you actually have to take ships and boats across the ocean.
Exactly, yeah. It's interesting to see that they both had those same feelings. They wrote that same way to each other. And this wasn't necessarily a secret from Eliza. In some of his letters, he even told Angelica that they talk of her first thing in the morning and last thing at night before bed. They always talk of Angelica.
Yeah, so he would introduce Angelica and Eliza to different people as his dear brunettes, like his his girls that he loved, his women that were very valuable to him, very important in his life. And you can see throughout his letters that Eliza appealed to a certain side of Hamilton, the loyal side, the side that was very much the person he wanted to be in the home and in society. But Angelica also appealed to another side of Hamilton. It was that like mental, intellectual, philosophical side where their correspondence is very much more, and you'll see when she writes back to him, is much more about his actual work, his actual thoughts. And so she's the woman who's actually had the correspondence we talked about with Thomas Jefferson and with some of the other large figures of this era, because she was very interested in socializing and getting around there and sharing ideas. She wanted the revelation, not just a revolution.
Exactly. And it's worth noting at this point, the way the musical sets their time frame here, it would have been about 2 years since Hamilton had even seen Angelica. She's been over in Europe for about 2 years. So that's a long time to be away from somebody that you care about.
It is. So in order to kind of represent that space between Hamilton's letter and then receiving Angelica's letter, Eliza comes upstairs after he is done putting his pen down he doesn't really put his pen down. He's like finishing writing this letter.
He never puts his pen down.
He writes like he's running out of time. He never stops writing. It's nonstop. Eliza has to tell him, take a break.
To which, like the busy father, the workaholic dads would say, I'm on my way. Give me a second. And she's like, there's a surprise before supper. It can't wait. I'll be a minute. Just save my plate.
Alexander.
Yeah. Okay. And so he actually does end up coming downstairs. She reminds him, your son's 9 years old today. He's got something to say. He's been practicing all day. Philip, take it away. And you'll see here, Philip is a bit recognizable. He's not quite 9 years old, at least looking on stage.
Right.
Because he happens to be the same actor who played John Lawrence.
Yeah, so Anthony Ramos is making his debut on the stage for the second act. He was Hamilton's best friend, John Lawrence. Now their son looks a lot like that John Lawrence guy, and it apparently gets a lot of laughs when Anthony Ramos is actually playing this 9-year-old boy, because he's clearly a grown-up.
Right.
He's clearly an adult talking about how, daddy, look, my name is Philip. I am a poet. I wrote this poem just to show it, and I just turned 9. You can write rhymes, but you can't write mine, which is it's really fun. There's a little bit of a meta joke there where you see someone looking at Lin-Manuel Miranda as Hamilton saying, you can write rhymes, but you can't write mine. He literally wrote these rhymes. He literally wrote these lyrics.
Did.
So that it's fun with that.
It's great to me that you have the same actor playing Philip and John Lawrence. These are the two men in the musical that Hamilton cares most about. He is deeply in love with both these men.
Yes, that is 100% true. And historically, there were not any men who came this close to an intimate relationship with Hamilton. So that's a very good choice on behalf of Lin-Manuel.
So before Philip starts showing his father the rap that he wrote, Eliza actually starts beatboxing on stage to give the beat behind it. And the actress was talking about this to somebody, and she was saying that she didn't consider herself a great beatboxer, but when they told her that she needed the beatbox, she got really excited, and she went home and she looked up on YouTube, great female beatboxers, and she just studied them all night long. And she said she had just moved into her apartment, so her neighbors must have thought she was crazy. Because what's this girl doing next door? Who is she? Why?
She's intense or insane. Something.
So she starts beatboxing, and Philip just comes in rapping and rhyming to his father to impress him. Like, hey, look, I'm as ambitious as you. I can be a wordsmith like you. I can be like you. And it's true. Philip showed a lot of promise to be like his father.
Yeah, he did. One of the things that the Hamilton also references is that Lin-Manuel Miranda is often asked, what is the most autobiographical scene in this show? What is the scene that is most from your life rather than from Hamilton's life or history in general? And so he says in one of the side notes that he actually references this scene itself because he sees him. And let me just read his quote. There's no history book in which you'll read about Philip doing a recital for Alexander. This came out of me, and looking at it, I see myself almost painfully in every character on stage. As Alexander, I relate as a father with an enormous workload. As Eliza, I relate because of the pains I take to slow down and carve out time for my family. But most of all, I'm Philip. I've written something and I'm proud of it, and I want to show it to the people I love. You didn't expect these notes to turn into my therapy session, did you? Which is a nice little aside. But he has this as an autobiographical thing where we all understand what it's like to look up to the people above us as a kid. We look up to the grown-ups in our lives. We're like, hey, be impressed by me. Look at me. I can do something cool like you can. I'm a big kid now. And we all look for that type of approval at some point in our lives, whether it's from your parents or from some other figure in your life. We all want approval. And this is Philip looking up at his dad, doing the thing that his dad has done this entire musical. And he is saying, Dad, I want to be like you. You can write rhymes. Look at me. I can do it too.
Exactly. So Lin-Manuel actually has famous people that he looks up to coming to see Hamilton and giving him notes on it even. Chernow comes and Sondheim comes to see his musical.
Yeah, there was a moment where Lin-Manuel Miranda tweeted at one point when Sondheim was listening to Aaron Burser, and he laughed out loud at the Burser rhyme. And Lin-Manuel Miranda from backstage tweeted, I wish I could have bottled that laugh and kept it forever. Because he said it's a hero. He loves working with Sondheim. Sondheim is one of the directors and composers who's done a lot of things similar to what Lin-Manuel Miranda has done in The Heights and in Hamilton itself, but in a slightly different way, but there's a lot of camaraderie there and respect.
So I love this next part. As Philip continues on, Hamilton starts to do what you normally hear friends do when there's a rapper freestyling, and he starts interjecting and encouragement into the rap. And it's this beautiful father-son relationship. He's so proud in this moment of his son and this thing that he did. He's like, what? Okay, bravo! He gets so excited, and I just love it. I love the idea of having someone encouraging you, but in this case, it's a father and son, and he's just so excited.
Yeah, he is actively encouraging his son. He is working with his son. He was busy. He was doing the absent father thing for a moment while he was writing a letter, but here you get to see that he is not absent from his family like that his whole time. He absolutely loves his time with his son. He's impressed by his son. He says at the end of this, hey, our kid is pretty great. I'm proud of him. I love this guy.
Yeah, Hamilton, your kid's pretty great. Where have you been for the past 9 years to recognize that until this point?
He just forgot. No.
So Philip says he practices French, plays piano with his mother. We saw that at the beginning of the song. He says, I have a sister, which he did historically, 3 years younger than him. And actually, I just want to touch on this real quick. When Philip dies, it really takes a toll on his sister. I think she lives to be around in their mid-70s, but she never recovers from this. For the rest of her life, she's basically in a state of mental breakdown and acts like he's still alive. Apparently, she talked to the people around her like he was still alive.
Yeah, so her name was Angelica Hamilton, presumably named after Angelica Schuyler, Angelica Church. And she was just 3 years younger than Philip, super, super close to him, and never, ever recovered from the loss of her brother. And as someone who has lost one of my own siblings, I know how devastating that is. I know how hard it is to deal with pain from someone that close to you leaving your life unexpectedly. And so I know what it's like to never be the same. I know what it's like to watch people deal with grief in a different type of way. But with Angelica Hamilton, she actually was never mentally or emotionally the same after Philip's death.
Yeah, so Chernow in his biography says, Philip's sister Angelica had been extremely close to her older brother. After his death, she suffered from a mental breakdown and never recovered. And she lived to 73, but was consigned to an eternal childhood and often did not recognize her family members. She sang songs that she had on the piano and duets with her father, and she always talked about her dead brother as if he was still alive.
That just breaks my heart to think about that. So he says, I have a sister, that's Angelica Hamilton, but I want a little brother.
Which historically he did already have two brothers at that point.
You're right.
And would later have up to 5.
Yeah, exactly. As one of the jokes that Lin-Manuel puts into the side notes of the Hamiltone, referencing that a lot this time, there's a reason for that. He says that if you want to see a musical with 8 kids, go watch The Sound of Music. Exactly. He didn't want to put all of them into this because it's already a huge cast.
But in a Ham for Ham performance, the cast of Fun Home did actually do a performance and a song referencing all the children, talking about their stories, basically.
Fun Home is so amazing. I love that musical so much. My sister is studying at Circle in the Square right now, and so she gets to tell me all these stories about Fun Home and meeting the cast in different areas. But anyways, yeah, that Ham for Ham is great. It's on YouTube. Look it up.
Yeah.
See the Hamill kids going to town on that. It's fantastic. Because they get to actually go in and sing about what each of the Hamilton kids did throughout the rest of their lives, which is kind of a neat little thing, a little add-on to the history.
Nice bonus content.
Right, it's neat. So to wrap up his actual rhyme that he has written for his father, he kind of demonstrates that he knows what his dad's doing. He knows that he's involved in his dad's affairs a little bit. He kind of demonstrates his desire to impress his dad. He says, "My daddy's trying to start America's bank. Deux, trois, quatre, cinq." And that's when Hamilton comes in. He's bravo. He's cheering on cheering Philip on.
So then Eliza cuts back in, and she's again trying to convince Hamilton, take a break. And more than just for dinner this time to hear Philip, take a break for the summer. Run away with us. Let's go upstate. Let's go to my dad's place. He's got a place where we can hang out for the summer and rest. But Hamilton's got too much to do.
He says, I've got so much on my plate. And then
funny little reference there because they're having dinner.
Yeah, that's true.
He says, save a plate for me earlier.
That's great. So Eliza's initial requests are not actually being successful. He keeps kind of shunning her advances in all these areas. And so she kind of pulls out this new card and starts playing this new direction. And she says, like, there's a lake I know in a nearby park. You and I can go when the night gets dark. And kind of a little bit of a hint and insinuation there. Like, hey, when the kids go to bed, we can actually sneak out and do something romantic together for a change. Like, Eliza and Hamilton have been pretty busy with their own respective spheres of life. So Eliza's been at home raising their two kids, and she has more on the way. And Hamilton has been working super, super hard. They both need a break. They both need to just be able to focus on each other for a change. Because you get the idea in this moment that they've not really had the chance to just pause and really have a romantic date night, just the two of them. We can't really speak to whether they had a lot of date nights, whether they did a lot or not. They obviously had a lot of kids, but they both had super busy schedules, lots of big obligations. Eliza Hamilton spent a good portion of their marriage pregnant, and a lot of their marriage was taking care of kids, taking care of the people that they took in and adopted. There were a lot of obligations on both of their plates, so they really could have used a vacation.
And he doesn't quite say yes to her. What he does say is, I will try to get away, which is definitely not confirmation to what she's asking. But then we get intercutting in here, Angelica writing a letter back to Hamilton, referencing his letter at the beginning.
Yes, and so very immediately you see that she goes straight to the point of what Hamilton is actually dealing with on an intellectual level and talks about work and about his job. He says, "My dearest Alexander, you must get through to Jefferson. Sit down with him and compromise. Don't stop till you agree." So she kind of goes straight to the point of that side of Hamilton's life. So the work side is really connecting with Angelica. She understands that. Eliza understands the family side. And together you get to see a full picture of all of Hamilton's passions, all of his life and the things he cherishes and values. But Angelica's talking directly like that. And she wants to tell Hamilton, who probably feels alone, feels isolated, hey, don't stop till you agree. Your favorite older sister, Angelica, reminds you that there's someone in your corner all the way across the sea. I'm fighting for you. I appreciate you. I respect you. And I believe in you. I know you can do this.
And she goes on to say, in a letter I received from you 2 weeks ago, the letter at the beginning of this song here, I noticed a comma in the middle of a phrase. It changed the meaning. Did you intend this? One stroke and you've consumed my waking days. Because he said, my dearest, comma, Angelica, here in the musical. Now, historically, this is actually based off letters that were flipped the other way around. Angelica was the one who said something and put a comma, and Hamilton was like, are you flirting with me? And he wrote back to her and was like, huh. And so apparently from that point on, in French, he would say, my dearest, and then comma, sister.
That's good.
When he ended his letters to her.
Lin-Manuel has called this comma sexting, where you just slip that in to change the meaning a little bit.
Exactly. And apparently it may have been a coded way for them to flirt with each other, to where if anyone else has read the letters, they'd be like, oh, well, my pen slipped, or, oh, I'm not great at grammar. I put commas in weird places.
Yeah. There's always a sly
little code to decipher.
Yeah. You can get out of that a little bit.
One of the letters that Angelica actually wrote Hamilton said, "My silence is caused by despair, for do not years, days, and moments pass and still find me separated from those that I love? Yet were I in America, would ambition give an hour to Betsy and to me? Can a mind engaged by glory taste of peace and ease?"
That's good. Remember that Eliza Hamilton often went by Betsy in their correspondence, and interchangeably Eliza and Betsy, or specifically just Elizabeth completely. So there were a lot of people that were intrigued by this particular flirtation between Hamilton and his sister-in-law. A lot of people commented on it. They were very friendly at dinner parties. They were very public about the way they introduced each other, the way they kind of laughed and joked and poked fun and touched each other. And they were just very, very friendly, very touching, very playful. And so a lot of people did insinuate things about like a menage a trois or some type of questionable relationship. Eliza loved her sister so much that her love for Angelica kind of provided a little bit of a shield for Hamilton himself to be able to flirt with Angelica somewhat just in a playful way, because they were already doing that as sisters to one another. And so he kind of got to be in there playing back and forth between the two of them. One person who did obsess about a lot of Hamilton's sexual escapades and wanted to paint him as a terrible, lust-driven miscreant who could not control himself was the vice president and ultimately president John Adams, who has a quote that actually was said about Hamilton after his death, so he didn't even pull any punches then, when he said specifically that Hamilton is devoid of every moral principle and is dedicated to his fornications, his adulteries, and his incests, presumably hinting towards Angelica and him having brother and sister stuff on the side.
Yeah, back then, even if your wife were to pass away and then you married her sister, this would be viewed as incest. They viewed in-laws as actual blood relatives, and so any type of mingling in that was incest.
Right. So cultures change, history changes, social contexts are a little bit different than they were then. But John Adams will make another appearance later in this song when we bring him up again. But what happens next is they start talking about how Angelica is actually going to come home for a visit. And so she may not have visited this specific summer historically, 1791.
Right. We're collapsing events here like we usually do in the musical, keeping things
tight and giving a time lock, putting everything in the right spot so that the drama is heightened and everything's put together. She says, "I'm coming home this summer at my sister's invitation. I'll be there with your family if you make your way upstate. I know you're very busy, and I know your work's important, but I'm crossing the ocean, and I just can't wait. You won't be an ocean away. You'll only be a moment away." So if you've been listening to this musical pretty carefully throughout this whole time, and you don't know a lot about how the Reynolds affair is going to play out in the end, you probably have caught on to the fact that Eliza and Angelica have both been in love with Hamilton. You've caught on to the fact that they've both had interest, that Hamilton has had interest in both of them. There's this flirtatious correspondence that we've just heard about in this particular song between Angelica and Hamilton. And now she's saying, hey, we're not going to be an ocean apart. We're not going to be separated by all these miles. We're just going to be a moment away. And so there's almost that hint of, like, when you're listening to this, if you don't know the history, you almost already are starting to worry. You're already just starting to think, oh no, Hamilton is stressed. He's already flirting with his sister-in-law. This is not going a good place. This is not going to be good in the end. He is dealing with his wife. He's dealing with his sister-in-law. He's flirtatious with both of them. And this is dangerous territory for Hamilton. And so it's a little bit of a red herring where you throw this out there and you think that maybe there's going to be that affair between Angelica and Hamilton in the musical. Yeah. You're already kind of setting that up, kind of giving you this, and there's a little bit of a bait and switch where you see that in this particular song, you're set up for all the things falling into place for there to be a possible Angelica Hamilton shacking up situation, and that's not what you get in the next song.
But I do love here when Angelica does show up and Eliza says, "Alexander, come downstairs. Angelica's arriving today." And then on stage, you have them all coming together. And Eliza and Angelica switch and say each other's names in that sing-songy way that they do when you were first introduced to them, except where they're saying their own names there. Now they're saying each other's names in this affectionate way. And then Hamilton's the one that comes in and says, the Schuyler sisters.
Right. And they are down 1 from their numbers in the first act.
There's that pause where Peggy should be, but she's going to be somebody else here in a second.
Exactly. She has her second role that she's getting dressed for backstage.
I also love here when Angelica says, Alexander, and then Hamilton, the man of many words, always has something to say, just goes, hi. And that's all he can muster.
A little shy almost. It's cute. The interactions there, very, very loving. They obviously have a connection. There's some chemistry there. And it's a beautiful family reunion.
Eliza then tells Angelica, tell this man that John Adams spends the summer with his family. And Hamilton rebuts, tell my wife John Adams doesn't have a real job anyways.
I love that.
Which, since the vice presidency has been a role, it has been viewed as a bit of a worthless job. Even so much that Adams himself thought this about it. And he was quoted as saying, my country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived.
Yeah, there's definitely that connotation. I think even today we look at like, what is the vice president doing really? They give speeches. They're ready to step in if something happens.
Right.
But yeah, especially back then, it was very clear the vice president and president weren't elected together at the time, so they didn't have a similar agenda that they were working towards. John Adams was basically a figurehead in the Senate who didn't get to do a lot. Senator Maclay was one of John Adams' a little bit of a political rival at times, and he looked up and occasionally he actually insulted John Adams. At one point, he wrote down, whenever he looked up at the vice president presiding over the Senate, he said, I cannot help but thinking of a monkey put into breeches. He just thought that it's just useless. This guy's up there not really doing anything. If there's a tie, he'll get to vote. But otherwise, I mean, there's not really much he's doing right now. It's just silly to have John Adams. So I love what Angelica and Eliza are doing. They're teaming up against Hamilton. It's whenever you get siblings together, they'll often kind of team up. They're now united in their efforts. They both want Hamilton to come upstate with them to visit their family's estate, to spend some time in vacation, relaxing with their family, getting to know each other, just relaxing together and enjoying that time. And Hamilton still resists. He's able to somehow resist the charm that is the Schuyler sisters.
And Angelica, just hearing this news when Eliza's trying to get her to try to convince him, says, you're not joining us? Wait. Which I kind of like because Hamilton doesn't wait. You should know this of all people, Angelica.
Right.
He doesn't wait. That's Burr's thing.
His pace is relentless. He wastes no time. And so he just makes that an excuse. He says, I'm afraid I cannot join you upstate, which really disappoints Angelica. Yeah. She says, Alexander, I came all this way. I crossed an ocean for you.
Which is a big deal back then. This is a journey that would have taken a month almost probably to get over to see them for just the summer. She traveled a long way and a hard way to travel.
Yeah, and so he just puts forward his arguments. He tries to stay strong in this. On his side of the aisle, he says, I've got to get my plan through Congress. I lose my job if we don't get this plan through Congress. So he's thinking a lot about Congress and the pressure that's on him.
And it's interesting because they're singing, take a break. And they have this sing-songy, happy-go-lucky, take a break.
Run away with us for the summer. Let's go upstate.
He is breaking that song and going, I have to get my plan through Congress. I lose my job if I don't get my plan through Congress. And there's no happiness in what he's saying. He's very stern and serious.
Right. And so I really like the moment when Eliza and Angelica take separate parts and they start singing on top of each other and echoing each other a little bit.
Yeah.
And so Eliza appeals to that romantic notion of going to the lake again. She says, there's a lake I know in a nearby park. You and I can go, taking a break together when the kids go to bed and all that. And Angelica says, I know I'll miss your face. And she has that famous line saying, screw your courage to the sticking place.
Yeah, another Macbeth reference here.
Exactly. So I didn't know exactly what that meant at first. Did a Google search of it. I actually found out that the first time in my life when I encountered this was not with Macbeth, but was a Beauty and the Beast reference.
Exactly.
Gaston in the song, the mob song, when they're getting ready to go kill the beast, he sings, screw your courage to the sticking place. It's a be brave, go for it and do this thing. Even if it's going to be a terrible thing, go for it and do this. So when she makes this reference, she is quoting Lady Macbeth. She is quoting Macbeth's wife in this particular setting, which is, to me, the most telling of all of the parallels. You saw the parallel for Madison, the parallel for Jefferson.
Right.
Here, she is putting herself into the place of, all parallels being considered, Hamilton's wife.
Yes.
So in the Macbeth play, you see that Lady Macbeth is actually encouraging Macbeth to go through with his plan that is a really bad plan to kill the king. And Lady Macbeth pressures him, puts that pressure on, saying, be brave. We made this decision. We know the right thing to do. We know what we want to do together. So let's go through with it. Let's follow through with the plan as we set it up, as everything is falling into place. So let's go through with it. Screw your courage to this stick in place. Eliza's right. You need to take a break.
And Eliza repeats that, look around, how lucky we are to be alive right now, trying to encourage him. Hey, look around. We have a lot here. Stop and smell the roses, Hamilton.
And while she is saying, take a break and look at all the things you've already accomplished and how lucky we are to be alive, Angelica's appealing to his optimistic ambition, saying, we know that if you take your time, you will make your mark. Close your eyes and dream when the night gets dark.
Yeah, which the first part of that we're going to see at the end of this whole musical that is Eliza who takes her time and makes his mark for him, which I think is just beautiful there. And then when she says, close your eyes and dream, if you'll remember, it's a callback to the song Satisfied, where she's closing her eyes and dreaming of him. So I almost wonder, is she telling him to close his eyes and dream, or is she like saying, oh, I can't see him, I'll just close my eyes and dream again?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's definitely a little bit of that on both ends of that, to where it's almost like, imagine what can be if we all just take some time and bond at our family's house. But there's also the moment of, like she said earlier, I know I'll miss your face.
Right.
She's the whole time at the wedding sequence, she said, at least I'll keep his eyes in my life. At least I'll get to see him. At least I'll get to dream about him, fantasize about him. And she's said throughout all of this, I'll get to see your face. I'll get to see your eyes. And here she is saying, close your eyes and dream. And so, yeah, it's just imagine what could be. And I don't know that there's necessarily an answer to what could be. Hamilton's mind is probably on work still. Her mind may be on something else. There's no telling exactly. It's probably supposed to be a little bit ambiguous.
And Hamilton's mind is one track here, straight on work, because he just repeats himself. I have to get my plan through Congress. I can't stop until I get my plan through Congress. And when he says that, the piano actually starts to play the melody from the Cabinet Battle #1, kind of a reminder, this is what's going on. This is what's on his mind right now. And that's all he can focus on, is what just happened in this cabinet meeting. So that takes us to the end of Take a Break.
And since this episode has gone a little bit longer than our normal episodes, what we're going to do is we're actually going to split this into a 2-part episode. So we get a part 1 of Take a Break and a part 2 for Say No to This. So we can go in a little bit more in depth without having to skimp on the details we want to dive into in the whole Reynolds affair.
So we announced 2 weeks ago a giveaway on our Twitter that we were giving away a Hamiltome. And the time has come to declare the winner.
Yes, it has.
And the winner is Purple Scientist at Koki Talks Trash on Twitter.
We really hope that you enjoyed this Hamiltome as much as we have. It's been a great resource. It's been a fantastic tool. If you did not win, we still thank you for following. Thank you for listening to the podcast as long as you have. Thank you for being a part of this community and engaging with us in really fun and intriguing ways. We've had a blast. We hope you're having a blast as well.
Right. And we may be doing more giveaways like this in the future. Who knows? It's something that we really enjoyed. And we're really glad that so many people participated in it. We saw that you guys like this. So we might think of some new ideas in the future.
Right. So now the next thing that we can do specifically for you is we have put together some different tiers of ways to reward people who want to actively participate in what we're doing at Graphomania Podcasts. We want to be able to give you some investment in these particular podcasts, from the Hamilton podcast to the Hancock Creative podcast, the Read Brave Comics podcast, and the Botchcast games that we're playing. So all of these things that are underneath the Graphomania umbrella, if you want to support any of this, you can go to our Patreon page and you can donate as little as $1 a month to up to the $10 Founding Father level, where what we're going to be doing soon is we're going to do some special recordings for people that exclusively support us, and so that we can give you some personal content, some direct exclusive content that you won't get in the actual podcast feeds, but it gives you the chance to invest in it and be a part of that. So what's the website for that?
So that's patreon.com/Graphocast, GRAPHOCAST. And we're not sure what we're doing with those recordings yet, but what we've done in the past was Robbie would write a rap for somebody and he'd perform it while I did music behind that. We might be doing something similar to that, maybe something a little bit different. We're actually open to suggestions.
Right. And so if you're interested in seeing a karaoke of the two of us doing your favorite Hamilton song or song from any Broadway musical or musical in general, we may be willing to let that be open to whichever you pick as a Patreon supporter at the $10 level. So yeah, give us your input. We are really wanting to do something that will benefit you, that you will really enjoy as a listener. So if there's something that you think would be a fascinating, fantastic idea that would be really fun, if you want to see how quickly we can rap through these songs ourselves, yeah, do that with us and shoot us a message on Twitter. You can find me at Alpha Knight. You can find the actual Graphomania podcast at Graphocast. And
I'm at Flesh Eater. And on that Patreon, for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to our exclusive feed where we post some exclusive stuff there. And I've already posted a couple of things, but there's more coming. We're going to be doing at least one secret show, quote unquote, a month on that feed. And that's just only $1 a month. And you'll get access to that at least and be supporting and promoting our podcast network, keeping us going here because it does take money to run.
So thanks again for listening. Hope you've enjoyed this particular episode of Hamilton the Podcast. Join us next time for the continuation of this musical.
I'm Vinton Bayne.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
See you next time. Hi, Vinton Bayne here again for a real quick announcement. The Graphomania Podcast Network has a new podcast, Read Brave Comics, a comics podcast where your hosts, Corey Casto and I, will introduce you to a wide variety of segments about the world of comic books, some of which will include segments by me and Robbie from this very Hamilton podcast. Check it out now on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or at graphocast.com, GRAPHOCAST.com. That's Read Brave Comics.